Okay, kids, so now we're on to Preterite Part 3. In Preterite Part 1, we explored the regular preterite, AR verbs, and ER and IR, which share the same endings. And in the second part, we explored verbs that end in car, gar, and zar, and how and why they change in their yo forms. And in Preterite Part 3, we are going to discuss the 5 irregular preterites, that is, the 5 verbs that are completely irregular in the preterite and need to be studied independently of all the other verbs. The first 2 verbs out of the 5 regular preterites that we're going to discuss are the verbs ser and ir. Uniquely in the preterite, these 2 verbs are conjugated identically. That is, they are conjugated exactly the same. And those conjugations are as follows. The yo form is fui. The tú, fuiste. De él y usted, fue. Nosotros, fuimos. Vosotros, fuisteis. And ellos fueron. The number one mistake that gets made with both ser and ir is confusing fui with fue. You can avoid the confusion if you can remember that the yo means I, so it's going to end in an I. Or you can simply remember this expression, I before E, right after foo. You have the expression in English, I before E except after C, but in Spanish it changes and it becomes I before E right after foo. Makes total sense. So again, ser and ir have exactly the same conjugation. Fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fuisteis, fueron. One thing to note, no accent marks. Notice none of these have accent marks. As a matter of fact, none of the irregular preterites, none, have accents. When it comes to ser and ir, you do have to be careful. Because the verbs are conjugated exactly the same, the only way to distinguish which verb is ser and which verb is ir is to look at them in context. For example, the 2 sentences you see here. Fui a la playa ayer. Fui un buen niño. In the first sentence, we're using fui as the verb to go. I went to the beach yesterday, so in this sentence, it is the verb ir. Fui un buen niño. I was a good boy, good kid. In this case, it's the verb ser. So again, because the verbs are conjugated exactly the same, you just have to be careful how you use them contextually. And when you're reading sentences and listening to dialogue, etc., you just have to make sure contextually you understand which one of the 2 verbs is being used. The next 2 verbs out of the 5 regular preterites are dar and ver. And dar and ver are often lumped together because their conjugations in the preterite are very similar to each other. Dar, to give, and ver to see, of course. Di, diste, dio, dimos, distes, and dieron. Again, note no accent marks. None of the irregular preterites have accent marks. Ver is exactly the same verb as dar, except instead of a D, we're going to use the letter V. V, viste, vio, vimos, vistes, and vieron. Di, diste, dio, dimos, distes, dieron. Vi, viste, vio, vimos, vistes, vieron. Same verb, 1 letter difference. The last one of the irregular preterites is the verb hacer, to do or make. And I like to call this a wrapper verb because its forms are as follows. Hice, hiciste, hizo, hicimos, hicisteis, hicieron. Again, no accent marks. None of the 5 irregular preterites have them. This verb's a little bit different from the other ones in that you notice that most of the conjugation starts with HIC, 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 HIC. The reason, the one of the 6 that's really different right here is this one, ISO. The reason for that, again, is taking a look at our combination of letters. If I started this one with HIC and put an O, I get ICO, because that C before the O is a hard sound. We can't do that. So we need to fix that, and that C becomes a Z, and that's why this one is ISO. We call this one a wrapper verb because ISO is like H to the ISO. So it's a wrapper verb, ISO, H to the ISO. Again, these are your 5 irregular preterites, ser and er, which share the same conjugation, dar and ver, and then hacer. Although there are 5 distinct and different verbs here, I like to think of it as really 3 irregulars. And the reason why I say that is because ser and er share a conjugation. Dar and ver are pretty much exactly the same. The D in dar and the V in ver, other than that, the verbs are written exactly the same. And then we have hacer, which is kind of the outlier, the one that kind of really does its own thing. So while we do have 5 irregular preterites, we're really looking at 3 conjugations that have to be memorized. And of all the verbs in the preterite, these are the 5 that have to be memorized individually, separate from each other, as they don't follow any particular patterns. But again, these are your 5 irregular preterites. Remember that there are no accent marks in them, and they are good verbs to know because they are verbs that do come up quite a bit. And that is the end of the preterite part 3. If you have any questions, I'll see you in class. Okay, kids?